The first thing about studying other religions, if you have to decide what the word religion means, and I asked y'all some questions last week, and y'all gave your opinions of what, religion is. But as I told you, as a foundation, every human being has a spiritual nature. And every human being is going to worship something, someone, that is, or something. And people even worship the universe. And we looked in Romans. Here you go, Bobby. Let me give you these other copies. Because did you have the other copies? No, there was something else. You got two? Okay. Yeah. But anyway, I may not have enough copies on that, but I thought I did. Romans chapter 1, verses 18 to the end of the chapter, talk about how people ought to know there's a God, the true God, because creation declares it. But what people do in their sin is they turn to the creation and find things in that creation to call God. For example, a lot of religions, some of them even today, consider the sun a god. The Native Americans did that. They worship the sun. If you remember painting their faces red, and there's a lot of them that, if you see pictures of the Indians and stuff, they'll have red symbolism. And I used to think it was just war paint and stuff, but it did talk about life, and sometimes red was for that, but a lot of times it represented the sun. So sun to them was a lot. The Egyptians, their chief god was the sun. And so people know there's something out here in the universe. Your spiritual nature is searching for answers. So to give you some kind of stability in life, you find something you can cling to that you call, as we call a God. They may call it the one or whatever. And we're going to look at the different ones. But that being said, that's the reason for all the different religions. Because if we don't turn to the true God, who revealed himself, and we talked about through the Bible and through Jesus and through nature, and then through his church and us, if people don't do that, they'll turn to themselves and they'll make up a God or create a God or something to explain existence here, something to explain the afterlife, which is mysterious, because no one's ever been there and come back except our Lord. And so people, if I can use the word superstitious is another word for religion. Okay? Now, I didn't say this last week, but in Acts chapter 17, the Apostle Paul went to Athens, Greece. And when he got there, at that time period, the Greeks had multiple gods. And they would spend all day long, these philosophers and these priests of these false gods, in an area up on the upper area there, they had temples and statues. And so they were literally probably in the thousands of statues with the names of the gods they worshipped. They had a god for love, a god for war, a god for passion, a god for, all kinds of things. A god for drinking, a god for fighting. They sacrificed animals. They, did many other different things to pay worship to these things. Well, as I mentioned last week, there was one statue that in Acts chapter 17, when the Apostle Paul got there, he looked at the city and it bothered him because there were so many people looking for different gods or making religions. So he went out there and there was one statue. The Greeks didn't want to offend any of the gods, so they put up one and, maybe up on the pedestal, and it said, "To the unknown God." So they covered all their bases and said, well, just in case we miss one, here's the unknown. So Paul went and stood beside that statue. And when people would come by and say, what are you doing? He said, well, he's unknown to you, but let me tell you who he is. So he used their pursuit of a God and their false pursuit and said, let me tell you who his name is. His name's God. And if you read that carefully, he never mentioned Jesus until he got toward the end. And people laughed at him because he talked about Jesus dying and coming back from the dead, and that you could have the hope of eternal life, and the Greeks didn't believe that was possible. So 2 people got saved. The rest of them laughed at him and said, well, we'll listen to you at another time. Because all day long they talked about religion and stuff. And Paul went there and found one of their statues. And so that gives me a clue today. We're living in a culture a lot like then, except we don't have statues. But we got people that are finding other ways to cope with being a human being in a world that's dying. Because they know they're limited. Because their loved ones have died, and they know that their time on, and they have no answers. Where are we going? What's going to happen? What's the reason for suffering? That's a big question in religions. Why do people suffer? And if you're a Christian, why does God let good people go through difficult times? And so a lot of these religions, that's their pursuit, is to answer those questions. Okay? And those are questions that are common to everybody, because even as Christians, we have things that go on in our lives, and we wonder, why would God let us, go through this? Well, if you read the book of Job, Job was a righteous man, doing everything that God wanted. I mean, he got up every day and prayed for his kids in case they had, sinned and done something wrong. He had a devotion every day and said, Lord, please forgive my kids and help them, even though they weren't maybe where they should be. So this guy covered all his bases, but then all of a sudden, Satan comes to God and says, the only reason Job serves you is because you put a hedge around him, you won't let nothing bad happen to him. And God says, really? I'm putting words in God's mouth. He said, I'll tell you what, if you think that's the real reason, you go ahead and you can do anything you want to, but you can't kill him. So what happened? He lost all of his crops. He lost all of his animals. I mean, this guy he was rich. And he lost, his family. And so Satan, came back and said, well, that's good enough for you. He said, but you know what? You take a man's life and he'll curse you and die. And he said, I told you you can do anything you want, but you can't kill him. So he got real sick. Some people think it was some type of cancer. Others think it was a serious boil infection, some kind of skin disease. And anyway, Scripture says that he sat down in ashes, which was a sign of mourning. And, then his friends, I call them the local church members, started showing up, and they said, you got problems. You got a secret sin. That's the reason why all this is happening. If you was living right, this wouldn't be going on. And, and so all three of the friends, instead of consoling him, just made it worse. That's his support group, and they were just pointing fingers at him. His wife said, you need to just curse God and give this whole thing up and die. That's what his wife told him. So he couldn't get enough support from his family, his friends, and the whole community said, this guy is the reason he's suffering because he's a big old hidden sinner. Well, God knew, and Job knew that wasn't true. And Job said, though the Lord slay me, yet will I trust him. So we got a story here of a righteous man suffering, and if you look at it very carefully, maybe if I'm here long enough, I might do a little series on it. It says that in this life, even good people will experience suffering, not because God's mad, but because this world is governed by sin and death. That's the simple answer. When Adam and Eve sinned against God, they opened up a keg of problems that even good people have to experience. My goodness, Adam and Eve, their first boys, one killed the other one. That's pretty bad, for come in and one killed the other one. And apparently they were up in age. It wasn't like a teenage thing. It was up in age, and it was over religion. They killed each other over religion. And I showed you that last week, how Cain didn't want to go to Abel and buy the sacrifices that were necessary. So you got a family problem, and Adam and Eve were basically good people. They sinned against God, but God forgave them, put the clothes on them and sent them out. And they were under his grace, but they had to experience suffering. And ever since then, bad things happen to good people because that's what's in this world. The good news is God's here to be with us, to sustain us, and help us with it. And he can do one of two things. He can deliver us from the pain, or he can take us back to be with him. And if he chooses to let you stay in the suffering, he will supply his grace, his mercy, his strength, and his resources, which he's unlimited, to get you through it. Then he will take your situation and turn it around. All things work together to good for those that love God and called according to his purpose. If he lets you go through it, he's going to use you to help someone else, to bring glory to him, or to bring them to them. And I've lived long enough to see that. Not every Christian can see it. It's just, you just have to keep praying and trusting and studying the Bible, and all of a sudden it comes clear that all these stories in the Bible are real, and these people who are God's people who suffered, If you look, because we see the end of their lives, and they all were working because they loved God and called according to His purpose. Well, a lot of these religions we're going to look at, they don't approach it that way. Number one, some of them said there is no God. There's just a out there. They call it the one, and I'll show you why they come to that. And so their answer to suffering is that, you know, the universe has to be balanced. You have to have, and that's the reason when Star Wars movies came out, may the force be with you, you know, and they had some of them dressed in white and some of them in dark, you know. Well, that's a culture thing for them. They see the universe as evil and good, and there's a war going on between those two forces. But they're just forces. They're not gods. They're not powers. They're just forces. So if something goes real bad, well, it'll take time, and the good force will come along, and it'll balance out. But you don't try to do anything. Just let it take its course. And you just say it's fate. It just happens. Well, Christians don't think that way. We call it faith. See? So anyway, that's one of the biggest things we'll answer. So coming up with a good definition for religion. Now, these things I put up here that are on your sheet, there's 8 elements that are in religion: belief system or worldview, interpretation of the universe. A lot of these religions look at the universe, and they come up with their beliefs of why things happen the way they do here. Okay. Now, some religions look at the stars, and it's in your newspapers, astrology. Astrology is a false science, but some people think it's science, and they say the way the stars align themselves, the way the moon and the earth and other things, there are people that have created, I call it nothing but lies, but they've attached to those universal positionings meanings for us on earth. So you get up and read what you read, your horoscope. You ever thought about that? Horoscope. And you think about, okay, today I'm not supposed to do this, or I can do that, and I'm going to have a blessing today. You know, the Chinese give you, Confucius gives you little sayings, and you open up your Chinese crackers, and, you know, it tells you what's going to happen. Well, they follow the belief that the stars and the universe, you know, speaks to us. But people make this stuff up. Okay, that's all it is. So some religions have what do we say about the universe? Created by God. So He's in charge of the universe. We're in His image, and He oversees us. And we don't look at the universe as a God. We look at it as God's creation. All right, community belief system is shared in religion. You have been blessed to live in America. It was founded by Christians, and even though it's kind of minimal right now, it still is probably the most Christianized nation in the world. Has sent more missionaries out of here other than until South Korea came along. We were the world's leaders in missionaries around the world. Now they're sending missionaries back to America. I don't know if you know, a lot of you know that, but they are. Because America is so moving away from Christianity, a lot of the foreign countries who have Christians are sending Christian missionaries back to our big cities to try to, you know. But anyway, a belief system is shared. How you act and how you do things is there. Central myth stories, we mentioned that. They were told within a community. Doesn't mean necessarily is untrue. People who aren't Christians say our stories in the Bible are myths. If you study the Native Americans, which I mentioned last week, they have a lot of stories. Those stories have meaning. We see them as myths but that's their interpretation of their lives. Ritual beliefs, ceremonies, baptism for the Baptists and, you know, others, but a lot of religions have different rituals they follow. Ethics, rules about human behavior. Almost all the religions we'll look at have a guideline for ethics. And it's funny because when you look at them, a lot of them sound like the Ten Commandments. They don't have all the Ten Commandments, but they have some of the same things. Don't steal, don't kill, you know, love your neighbor, and all that. So there's a commonality between human beings, even though they believe differently than we do. The basic ethics, that is how to live your life, good versus wrong, are there. And part of their belief system is this is how you behave as a human being, even with no God. So where'd that come from? That was put in us when we were created. A rational, you know, consciousness, if you want to call it that, of what right and wrong is, basic right and wrong. And, you know, killing a human being and things like that is wrong. Emotional experience, guilt, awe, mystery, devotion, conversion, rebirth, liberation, ecstasy. Almost all religions have different phases you go through. If we go back and put Christianity in emotional experience, Some people feel guilty about their sins. They come to church. They realize Jesus can forgive them. They're in awe of God's power, His majesty. There's some mystery involved. People as Christians get devoted, do devotion, study more about God. They have an experience they call conversion, rebirth or liberation, ecstasy. Some of the Christian groups speak in tongues and get out of control and do emotional responses, and yet they call themselves Christians. And they respond. So that's part of this word religion, okay? And we'll get into some of that. Material expression, statues, music, paintings, objects, flowers, incense, architecture, locations. The Mormons have, I think it's just a handful of temples. They have one in Utah. And they have another one, I think, in Texas. And I forget, what, these are big tabernacles. They, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, 365 days a year, they have people being surrogate people being baptized for the dead. Because they believe to get you into the celestial world where you can be on your planet with your wife, and that's why they have celestial marriage and you wear your underwear, matching underwear. To get you there, you have to be baptized into the church. But there's a lot of people that don't go to the Mormon church. So they go through the genealogical records and pull the names out, and then they have people stand in the place of them, and they're being baptized, and they call out their names and say, Bobby Eubanks, I could be in the Mormon world, I don't know. But they'll have people baptized. That's why they keep up with their genealogy. And when I was doing my family tree before you got on all the internet stuff came, studying these religions, I got into it, and I said, well, I'm going to go to the Mormon church. I can find my family there. So one day at the hospital, I finished visiting the hospital, and I stopped. Went in the back door of the Mormon thing. They have a big area in there and all kinds of records. You remember the stuff you can look, microfiche? I had all that, and so I put my information, wrote it down, and she gave me the area to go to, and I went to there, and there they were, and I found my grandfather and some others. And anyway, I got hooked on hunting for family. Well, as you leave, they had a little bowl there that says, would you like to make a donation to the Latter-day Saints of I just took it out and put it in my pocket. No, I didn't do that. But here's the funny thing about it. I did that 4 or 5 times. Well, one of my members was working next door in construction and saw me going in the back door. And so they confronted me at church and said, Pastor, why are you going to the Mormon church? I said, man, you caught me. I didn't want anybody to know. I knew I was going to get caught. I said, I'm doing my family tree. And I said, they have the best records of anybody. And he said, why is that? I said, they're baptizing for the dead. They accumulate these records worldwide. They're baptizing for the Chinese. They're baptizing for India. They're baptizing for America. And I said, 24/7, 365, they've got people. They call out their names and they get it from the Bible. But that's not what Paul, when he talked about the baptism of the dead, that's not what he was talking about. And it's in Corinthians. It's in Charleston. You usually have several Mormon churches in every town. They've got them here. They go door to door, used to a lot. They I hadn't seen many of them where I'm at, but it was just a local Mormon church. They call it a temple. They don't have a pastor, they have elders. And but anyway, in the back was their research area. And they were loaded up with microfiche and all kinds of stuff.
Goes to Atlanta to serve there in some capacity.
They got secret rituals they do. And he probably goes there he's probably one of the higher ones. He's way up in the...
He married into it.
Yeah. Well, once you marry into it, yeah. Yeah. Well...
He married a Baptist preacher.
He was a Mormon. That's why I got it backwards.
Yeah.
Stephen is a Mormon.
Yeah.
We had a woman that lived with us for 9 months. He was a physician I worked with, and he was doing a travel assignment at the Children's Hospital. And he lived with us for 9 months. He became one of Barry's best friends in the whole world, but he never, ever made any effort to change us or to his faith or tell us about his faith. However, he went to church with us 3 times.
Yeah. Well, we had some Mormons attend here a couple of months ago.
Because I worry about him ever since we...
And I preached on Jesus. I remember to be...
Stephen, I've known Stephen. I met Stephen when I was in 7th grade, when I had to go to North Justice School. And I have never had him speak to me about
See, that's how Wade
his
was.
Mormonism. Never.
Now, 2 of the elders who were, when he shaken yet, came to our house, that went to his church, came and tried to talk to us, and they said, you can't go to heaven unless you get, they started talking to us about the Mormons, and they said, you have to be baptized again. I said, then I would be throwing Jesus' blood right back at him. He's already died for me.
Well, if they come to your door, they're not going to talk about Mormonism. None of them will. They talk about Jesus Christ. Okay? Go online. You can get a copy online. You can read it online. Read the Book of Mormon. It is bizarre. It is way out there. Okay? But it's written like Scripture. But it doesn't even come close to what we believe. What they found out, the Mormons were persecuted. Once Joseph Smith got started, he started in New York, and they ran him out of there. A lot of the cults started in the state of New York. They really did. The Jehovah's Witness, all of them started up in that area. Because there was a time in America when these things were popping up everywhere, and he just happened to be one of them. His problem was he included in his religion, I know I'm jumping ahead of the game, but he believes you should have multiple wives, you know. And he put that in there. Well, a lot of them in the church didn't like that because he was going with their wives. He said they were his wives too. And that was the biggest beef his followers had with him, was he'd just say, that's my wife too, and he'd go have relations with her or whatever. And so he didn't get along good with his people. They didn't like that doctrine because he said, you know, we're in this thing together, we're going to our planet one day, but I need to experiment around with your wives too. And so he eventually got killed, and many believe his own people killed him. But everywhere they went, they got in controversy because of that. But they will not today. The persecution put them in Utah. And then there was a massacre in Utah, and there was a massacre. They killed people, and then the federal government came in and killed them. And anyway, long story short, Brigham Young, I think, was the one that kind of settled things. And they realized they had to change. And so they actually changed the Book of Mormon, because originally the Book of Mormon said if you're black, you can't go to the New World. You're accursed. You're just going to be condemned. And they changed that when the people started talking about desegregation and all that. They altered it a little bit, but they still believe the white race is superior. And I'll show you when I show the video and stuff. But see, people don't know that because you know why? They're good people morally, ethics. They don't drink caffeine. They don't drink alcohol. Most of them don't. Yeah, water. They don't go to places of ill repute. You don't see them in a club anywhere. You won't see them doing anything. They don't steal. They don't, and all these things. But they got some bizarre stuff. But they're good people. And mostly Baptists get attracted into them because of the ethics, the moral behavior. If you saw the commercials on TV for a couple of years, that's all you saw. The Church of the Latter-day Saints. They changed their name. It used to be called strictly Mormons. But the Latter-day Saints, they said that Joseph Smith was a prophet for the saints living today, and he came to finish out the Bible. We know better than that, but people fell into it. But they weren't accepted for decades after decades. Then they started investing in land. They found out if they could invest in some things. So now they're very wealthy. They own the whole Marriott chain and a few other places. They own all that. And they're very wealthy. The guy that ran for president, Mitt Romney, one of the biggest Mormons in our country, and filthy rich. And I'll tell a story real quick, and then I'll move on. When they ran Mitt Romney and nominated him, I was part of an organization that's up in Washington. And anyway, I got invited to go, and Gail didn't want to go, so I went and I heard good preaching. I mean, this was a Christian group. Good preaching, good speakers, and it was tied in with the thing. But they invited us over to the headquarters of this Christian organization. And so I went, and so they led us through and showed us the building and told us that. And so they said, do y'all have any questions? And I got a question. Why in the world did y'all endorse Mitt Romney, who is a Mormon? And they looked at me and said, well, it's the lesser of two evils. I said, you're not going to get him elected, and I'll tell you why, because a lot of people sitting back home know who the Mormons are, and they don't want him in there. So I said, you chose the candidate for the Republicans. It means the Democrats are going to win. And you know what happened? Nobody voted for Mitt Romney, and the Democrats won. And but I told them, I said, y'all got to get on board here. If we're gonna get this nation back, we got to have bona fide Christians in there. You know, they don't have to come out and toot their horns. They just need, when they get in there, they stick to the principles. And they didn't like that. So I went back to my meetings, flew back home. You know, I was kind of like a little prophet on the hour for a minute. But anyway, getting back to Mormonism, they have all kinds of rituals. And I was talking to some of you who are Masons. They use Masonry rituals. That's what they do. They tie the Masonry into, because he was a 32nd degree Mason. So he just put that into his religion, and they do all that in the temple, the secret rites, and the priests.
Expelled from Masonry.
Right, but it's there. And that hasn't changed. They haven't changed it. It's still there. But I'm just saying, he was a Mason, and he mixed it in with that. So when we see the video, you'll see that. And that'll be down the road. I'm not going to do it. Material expression, buildings and things like that, it's just like this building we're in. You know why it's designed like this? Because it's a basic design of the way the temple was and the tabernacle was. Except we don't have the Holy of Holies, we have the baptismal. And, you know, the Holy of Holies would be the Ark of the Covenant, but you have your congregation, you have the outside, you come to the congregation, and then you have a central thing, focus, where the preaching is done. That design goes through all of Christendom, and it comes out of the Old Testament in spaces. If you go to Native Americans, they like high ground. A lot of the false religions choose high grounds because they're up in the spirit world. And so places are designated as holy places. Native Americans had sacred burial grounds and stuff like that. Our cemeteries are basically sacred. And the tombstones face what direction? East. Why do they face east?
Because he's going to come back.
He's coming to eastern sky. You know.
The cemetery in between Aiken and New Ellington is owned by the Mormons, and their graves don't face east.
No, it looks like a puzzle because, you know, they're going all over the universe, you know. I'm just joking. Flowers, incense, architecture, locations, all that. Religion includes sacredness, the holy things people place, and places can all become sacred to the worshiper. We talked about sanctuary, okay? And I'm just trying to catch up with the ones who wasn't here last week. Now, these words look hard, but once you break them down and you look at the sacred, this is interesting, and I'll show you why, okay? There's basically two kinds of religions, okay? That big word, don't let it scare you. It's just theistic, okay? Sounds like a big word, but watch this. In the old language of our Bible, this word, you'll see it places in there, and it translates God. So if a religion is theistic, that means they worship a God. Follow me? Okay. So when you worship a God, and not just stuff, then when you look at time, time is viewed like this. You have a beginning, and you're going to have an end. So if we read our Bible, what do we see in the first verse? In the beginning. And what do we see at the end? It's coming to an end, right? A new heaven and a new earth. You follow me? So if you look at Christianity, we're theistic because at the center of our religion, we worship God who's revealed himself in his Son, Jesus Christ, both one and the same. So that's an example of a theistic religion. Jews do the same thing. Jehovah, Yahweh. They don't accept Jesus as a fulfillment of that, but they still are theistic. And if you look at their calendar, they have a beginning, and they believe there's going to be an end. And in the end, they're going to be ruling the universe with God, their Messiah, which they won't recognize as Jesus. Islam, same thing. They're theistic. If you read the book of the Quran, they have a beginning, they have an end. Muhammad is their prophet. Allah is their God. So when you hear those terrorists hollering, you know, Akbar, Allah Akbar, and so forth, praise to Allah, because they're giving themselves something. When we get to it, you'll see why they do that. We don't do that, but they do. But they're theistic, okay? And so there are a lot of religions out there that serve a God. we're the only ones, and this is the reason why it sets us up for persecution. We're the only ones that take the Bible literally, and we see that God is the only true God. There are no other gods. See, this is what I had to get over when I was teaching religions in college, and I did it for almost 20 years. I didn't want to do it, and I told you I didn't want to, why I didn't want to do it, but the biggest thing was I didn't want to be teaching other religions, And then the light came on, like I told you. I said I let the students do a lot of it, so when they covered them. But here's the thing, because I believe there's only one true God, it's like Acts 17, where the Apostle Paul was there at that statue. I go into where all their religions are, all their gods, and we talk about him. And we compare. And when I told my class, they said, well, they would ask me, they would pin me down, and I really wasn't supposed to say as a professor there's only one religion, only one God. I really wasn't. But they would pin me down and say, well, what makes you think, we've heard that Christianity is, some people think it's the only religion. And I said, well, it's because it's in the Bible, and it states that, you have no other gods before me, blah, blah, blah. And they said, well, suppose you come across something new one day. I said, duh, world religions. We got them right here in front of us. And I said, let me turn this around. Since you're going to be learning about these other religions, then when we get to the end of the class and you choose what religion you want to follow, what is the outcome of following that religion? What is the benefit? That's the practical side. I approach that with a practical side. I said, for me, even though I can't see my God and touch my God, and I said, or hear voices, I said, his word is like a roadmap for me. And I said, I follow it. And I said, it keeps me, though not perfect, out of a lot of the heartaches and suffering that you can create for yourself. Because when you follow a lot of these other religions, like Mormonism, and not all Mormons believe in multiple wives, but there are some that do. It used to be more than it is now. Because a lot of states said right on to the bat, no polygamy. I don't know why a man would want to have multiple wives.
I wouldn't want to share a husband.
Well, they do it, But just think about your bill on your credit card, what it would look like, What do you mean you spent $500? What do you mean, and all that stuff. But, yeah. But what I'm saying is, what is the outcome? And, I've had people sitting in the control room right over here, it used to be Columbia Nitrogen, and, they noticed about me, they said, you don't cuss, you don't go out to the clubs with us, you don't drink with us, you don't smoke a cigarette, you don't really get involved in all the stuff we're involved in, and they said, how do you have fun? And I said, well, I've got a wife and kids, and we do things. And I said, we do things at the church. And I said, I love fishing. And, at that time I wasn't hunting. But I said, well, we're normal people. Well, man, you need to go to the clubs with us and do all this stuff. I said, we have a good time when you get drunk. And I said, well, I like staying. I said, I've never been drunk because I don't drink. And I said, I would remain sober so I can understand what's going on around me and, and everything else. And I said, most people I know that are drunk, like some of you, your lives are all messed up. Multiple marriages, divorces. This one guy claimed to be a Christian. He got sucked into going to the clubs, and I was covering for the supervisor one night, and he come knocked on the door, and he said, his name was Chip. He said, can I talk with you? And he said, it doesn't have to do with work. He said, I'm in a mess. I said, what's wrong, Chip? I let them fools talk me into going with them. Now my wife's going to leave me. I said, really? Well, I thought y'all was having a good time. He said, well, I was for a while. He said, but I done got in over my head, and she's leaving with the kids and everything. I said, but buddy, all I can do for you is pray for you. I said, I wasn't a pastor then. I was just a churchman. But he could see the difference in me. And I told him, I said, and I told all of them, and they'd get drunk and do all the stuff, but when they come in, they kind of leaned on me when things weren't going well, And to me, that's a practical outplay of, Christianity, okay? All right, now, let's talk about this other one. And there's that theos over there, which means God. The other one has got the, non on front of it. And this one's interesting because most of the world follows this, or half of the world follows this. And what this means is the people who have this kind of religion, Hindus, Buddhists, Confucius. I always thought that was funny because when you read some of his stuff, he's supposed to be a wise guy, but when you read some of his teachings, it's very confusing. And I think that Chinese means this is a confused guy. But anyway, non-theistic, they look at the world and the universe and time as measured as a circle. So you have winter, you have spring, and then you got summer, and then you got the fall. And what they notice, looking at their universe, things, are born in the spring. They, get better here, crops and everything. They die in the fall. Then winter comes, and it's on an endless cycle. And they look at the sun up here and its position in the sky and the stars, and they notice a pattern. So a lot of people who believe the world is the center of the universe and all this other stuff rotates around us. I know a lot of people used to believe that, but not anymore with science. Science refutes that. We're not in the center of the universe. But they mark their time in a circle. So most of them don't believe in creation. This, what we call reality we live in, has always been. And so their explanation is, it's like a big wheel of life. It's like a wheel. And you're out here on this perimeter living. All right? In the middle, most of the religions call it the one, the force. It's not anything like God. It's not a person. It's not even a spirit. They just call it the one. It's what has got all this spinning around and all this you call reality and all of life and all that you see and visualize, this one. And your goal in life is to get here. Because if you get here, you go out of existence. You're not annihilated, but as far as your consciousness and your suffering, remember they want to answer suffering? So if you can get here and do the right things out here, you can get here. And if you get here, you're absorbed into the one, and you basically don't have personality, you don't have consciousness, you don't have anything. You're just there. But you're not annihilated. Now, how you can do the two, I don't know, but that's how they say. Now, I'm giving you a simple explanation. So, you ever heard of the word reincarnation? Okay. So what they say is this. If you're living now, their religion has all these things you need to do. Like the Hindus, they have stuff. If you're, a Buddhist, you have things you need to do. If you're Confucius or Tao, they call it. There's different ones in Japan. Shinto. All those religions say, do these things, and that's going to improve. And we talk about this, and you've heard Christians say this, good karma. You ever heard people use karma? What's karma? We use it. Huh? Stuff. No, it's doing all the things that you need to be doing. I hear that word thrown around in Christianity. I hear people, well, the karma's right, or they're practicing good karma, which is another way of saying they're keeping up with all their, and that's another thing. These religions are works religions, okay? In other words, you got to do stuff to get to the one, okay? But here's what happens. It may take you forever to get off this wheel of life. So they believe that you can get closer to this if you practice all of what the religion says you should do. You'll get good karma, good points, good deeds. If you do it just right, all of a sudden, when you die, you get a soul. If you didn't get it right, you'll come back as another animal. Or maybe another person. Repeat, it could be one of those processes, and there's no end to it because it's on a circle.
There's nobody in that circle.
All right, do you know why the Hindus don't mess with cows? Why you see them walking, people starving, they got a healthy cow, female cow.
They think there's somebody came back as a cow.
Right. And the cow gives more back to life than any of the other animals they have. You got the milk. You've got, well, they don't eat the meat because it's their ancestor, but you got the urine. Urine plays a major role in that culture. They use it for different things. And even the waste that comes out the back of the animal, the dung, you don't do anything with that. That's special too, because they can sacrifice it by burning it and heating things and cooking their food with it, and they can use it for fertilizer. So the cow is a sacred animal. You ever heard sacred cow? That's where it comes from. And in that culture, that's a good position. And see, if you come back, you'll actually be taken care of, and you won't have any responsibility. You'll get fed, you'll be herded around. But when you die as a cow, what are you going to come back? I said, it'd be my luck I'd come back a cockroach, a palmetto bug in South Carolina in Charleston. And what do people do when they see one of those? Stomp them. That'd be my luck. And I'd have a short lifespan, crawl around and that's it, Or a mosquito or something like that. Right. And that's the reason why. All life is sacred. So if you go to the extreme, and there's a big name and I'll show you when we get to it, the extremists of these religions will actually carry a little broom around with them. So if they see an insect, an ant, or anything, they'll gently move them out of the way so they don't step on them. They won't swat mosquitoes. They won't try to kill a fly. Huh?
Anybody be so deceived?
Well, it's because if you were born there and that's all you knew, knowledge is power. That's the reason why it's so important for us who know the truth. There's a lot of responsibility. Y'all think these sermons I'm preaching are just, you're hearing what you should be doing, okay? And God is trusting you and has saved you for a time such as this. And if you ever get real serious about your faith, it'll change the way you live your life, and you realize you have a purpose, not just going to church, but hey, I'm really here to let those walking in darkness find the light. And you can't do the whole world, but where you are, you heard the song Bright in the Corner, where you are. You don't have to try to save the whole world because you can't. But if every Christian brighten the corner where they are, then, we could change our country. We could change our culture, And that's what we have to, and Satan's talked us out of that. He's talked the church into doing other things than this. But anyway, getting back to this, some of the extreme things you have to do to fulfill this, like in India, one of the things you have to do, and one of the parts of it, is you go through phases of life. And when you get into what we call senior citizens, I think it's in the 50s, something like that, if you live that long, you have to go back to nature. You have to leave your family. You have to go out in the woods. And in extreme cases, you don't wear any clothes. And it's kind of like naked and not afraid or whatever. You have to live off the land and survive out there and get back into nature. And that's what you should do. Now, what they've done, the more moderates have said, well, that just means you take a camping trip once a year, and that'll work, because they got tired of doing the real thing, But there still are, you got different levels, and we'll talk about this, different levels of extremists, even in these religions. So, going back over this means, and I'll use this word a lot, I'll say this religion is theistic, and you say, well, I remember he said that means there's a God. And they'll have a Bible or something like a Bible, tell you how to worship this God. Follow me? Usually involves salvation. Being saved from damnation. The Jews and Islam. But you got non-theistic religions. They have teachings, but they're not really Bibles. They're just teachings of these guys who formed these religions based on this time. So when they look at time, time is endlessly running. And they don't have a beginning and an end because it never ends. You just get moved around. It's really sad. But that's what they believe. So if you go into that culture to try to witness to them and teach them, you better be trained, because you can offend them very quickly. But believe it or not, and one of the things I noticed when I studied these religions, those ethic things, don't kill anybody, and I had an atheist in one of my classes, and he asked the people what they believe, just basically. And he said, well, I'm an atheist. And some of the Christians around there went, I said, y'all stop that. He's here. He's taking the class for credit. Blah, blah. He's a 20-year veteran, and he's coming back to get his educational credit, And so at the break, I told some of the students, I said, quit making faces when he tells you he's an atheist. So me and the atheist got to be good buds. So in one of our breaks, I asked him, I said, you seem like a pretty straightforward guy. You talk about your family. I said, you work, you've been in the military, served our country. And I said, thank you for your service, and blah, blah, blah. And I said, let me ask you a question. I said, so in your opinion and your understanding, there is no God? He said, yeah. I said, well, let me ask you a question. I said, where did all these values that you follow, where did they come from? I said, have you ever searched that out? And he said, well, not really, just the way I was raised. And I said, well, the people that raised you, he said, well, they were Christians. And I said, well, they raised you that way, and you're raising your kids this way. Those are Christian values, but you see they're in other religions too. You know, and you just get them thinking, because with an atheist, they're so bowed up. There's a reason why they're an atheist, and most of the time, not all of the time, the reason they're an atheist is because they've had someone close to them tragically die, usually a young child, that was very special to them. They got mad at God, and so decided, well, since this happened to me, there can't be a God, because if he was a loving God, he wouldn't let this happen. Most of the time, you'll hear that when you talk with them. So don't point fingers at them and tell them they're, because here's the funny thing about Christianity. For a couple hundred years after Jesus, guess what Christians were called? Atheists. Because watch this. In the Greek language, if you put the letter A in front of something, most of the time, not all of the time, that means no or not. No gods. So if you were living in the Greek culture and they have many gods and they're ordained by the government and Caesar is a god, the government says, you got to worship Caesar and he's your emperor. And you're going around and said, there's only one Lord and his name is Jesus. Well, they're going to single you out, persecute you, and say you're breaking the law because it says you have to pay honor to Caesar and pay money to Caesar because he's a god. The Caesars declared themselves as divine. So they gave a name to the Christians and said they're atheists. Man, when I was teaching church history and I come across that, I said, well, boys, things changed. At one time we were atheists and now we're Christians. And we got called Christians by people who were making fun of the Christians at Antioch in the book of Acts. Because they were called people of the way. If you read Acts, it tells you that. And then at Antioch, someone noticed and said, these people act like that Christ fella, like little Christians. And someone said, that's what they are. They're just like him. You know, he was an insurrectionist. He was a terrorist. He had a group of terrorists. He went against the Jewish faith that claimed he was God. He deserved to die. He's a criminal. He's a Roman criminal that had to die. And their followers are him. Who follows a dead, leader or whatever? And so they called them Christians. They made fun of them. So to be called a Christian was a negative thing for a long time. And then after about 325 AD, the emperor became a Christian. He declared the whole Roman Empire that he was in control of Christian. And that's when it switched. But it was politics and church. And I'm not teaching church history, but you understand why you're not supposed to mix the two if you go back and study that history. But up until then, that was a negative thing. You had to practice your faith in secret. You couldn't have a place like this. You couldn't come and gather like this, So, in summary, we will look at theistic and non-theistic. I'll label them. That's kind of a general characteristic. We got just a couple of minutes. Any questions on that? Do y'all understand that? Am I too far? Because I can break it down if I get,
I think it's good to get going. I know it's because of work at medical college. But you think about all this stuff, infiltration of the United States, it's very impossible for somebody like me or you to even get into medical school. There were their beliefs, and I guess I'm thinking downstream, does that affect how we see somebody or how we feel somebody?
Well, it shouldn't, because when they go, and Dr. Keogh taught me this, my oncologist, I was having a hard time with the chemo. It was rough, and it was blistering my inside, and I went to a gastrologist, and he came back with a report, and he said, we've got to stop that one particular drug. He said, it's going to kill you. And I said, duh, I'm here to testify, yes. He said, well, my oath says to cause the patient no harm. That's part of their, Hippocratic oath. It goes all the way back to the Greek culture, Hippocrates. So those who practice medicine are under an oath to approach that patient with science, known, proven science, and their goal is to keep that person alive as best they can. So these people are intelligent.
Islamic people don't.
I had an Islamic surgeon who did a wonderful job on me. No, but they're not out to kill you.
They're not out to kill you, but they definitely are very prejudiced, even though they're wonderful physicians.
Mm-hmm.
But it's really, really bad if you're a female and you're a nurse on top of that. That's like a double whammy. And I could just tell you, I lived in that world.
Yeah. Well, there's a reason for that. Sharia law looks down upon women in a very negative way, period. You shouldn't be doing what you're doing. And if you had wanted to challenge them, you could have. But you'd had to challenge them through the hospital. And the only trouble with challenging them through the hospital, you would lose your job. And that's what makes it difficult for Christians today. Because when we try to challenge, and I don't want to, we'll get into this as we go along, but our Constitution has in the First Amendment, protection of religion and freedom of the press, right? So when our founding fathers put that in there, they didn't specify Christianity. But that's what it's kind of like, I had some books in my library about the Constitution, and one of them was original intent. What was their original intent? And that's what Supreme Court justices do. They try to determine what their original intent is. That's why abortion was overturned. Roe versus Wade was overturned from the Supreme Court. It was a bad decision because the original intent was the Supreme Court, when they interpret the Constitution, there's nothing in that Constitution about having a baby, sexual preferences, and whatever. Even when this thing about homosexuals, marriages, and things like that, that's going to get overturned eventually in the Supreme Court because there's nothing in the Constitution that's left to the states. So if South Carolina wants to have abortions, if South Carolina wants to have gays, marry gays, or whatever, we can do that without interference in the federal government. Now, that being said, they never saw a time when we would have other religions, okay? And that must be my beaver telling me to quit. Oh, no. They never saw that. Do you know where the Marine song came from the shores? Yeah. Do you know what Tripoli is? It's a fight against Arab pirates off the coast of North Africa. And we sent a small fleet, 3 or 4 ships in there, and we whipped their behinds, okay, and stopped the pirates. They were pirates, but they were Islamic pirates who didn't have a problem stealing from people who weren't Islamic. The Quran says you can do that. So America sent our Navy boys in there when we didn't really have a Navy, and that's where the song came from. It was the first major marine conflict on foreign shores, and that's where it came from. But what I'm saying is, it was the first time 2 religions met each other. Okay. Now, that being said, though, today we are living in America, and what people have done have said this is what we are now, pluralistic, which means under the First Amendment, no one can tell you how to worship God or to say who your God is. That's how they interpret it. But if you really went back and studied these founding fathers, and trust me, I have, that was not their original intent. They never saw a day where America would be bombarded because America was founded by Christians, Anglicans, Methodists, Presbyterians, Catholics. And even Catholics are considered Christians. So they never saw a day when Islam, because they'd fought wars against Islam and kept them overseas, and they never got the religions from China and all that over here. We're isolated as a nation. My goodness, we've got big oceans on each side of us and an ocean to the south of us, and except for Canada and Mexico. That's why we've been able to be stable through the years. Nobody can invade us. We know they're coming before they get here. See? A lot of people don't understand that. So, that being said, we're pluralistic now, and the liberal thinkers, call them woke people, whatever, through the years have been using the courts to change the interpretation to allow for other religions so that your chaplains have to teach Satanism, witchcraft, all of these things under the First Amendment. So they're using the First Amendment. Tell you a funny one, and we'll quit. Where I pastored, there was this guy trying to get a little strip club in there. And the county was fighting him, the local people were fighting him, and he had this building and property picked out. And he wanted to put a strip club in there, but he couldn't get a license. He could get the liquor license, but he couldn't get the right to do this because there was houses, Long story short, he went back and filed a 501c3 and called his church the Church of the Fuzzy Bunnies. And this is no lie. I ain't making this up. And it was about 2 miles from our church. And his face was on TV. And I didn't know anything about From Adam's House Cat. But I knew from what he was trying to do, I said, this is near my church. I need to get involved. So, I'd never met him. But anyway, it was in the news. I said, the church, it said, yeah, it's going to be a strip club. And some of my members were worried about it. And I said, well, I'm out there looking. Let's just give it time. Let's see what happens. And so anyway, I was at the little Subway shop eating a sandwich. And the Fuzzy Bunny preacher came in. And he was a thug. I mean, you could see. And he had 2 bodyguards with him. And they were big people. And I'm sitting there eating my little sandwich. And I heard somebody said, they called him by name. And it was a name that was associated with the church. And I said, Rutrow. I said I was going to deal with it, but I didn't know you was going to bring them in here while I'm eating my lunch. And so I said, what am I going to do? And about that time, one of the girls in the back knew him. And she come out and she said, you need to get out of here. She said, you're no good. You got my sister into, this is in front of everybody. My sister into prostitution. You deal with drugs and you're on TV trying to start a crazy church. You're evil. And I'm not having anything to do when she took off her plastic gloves and walked out. Well, I'm thinking, there's going to be a shootout here with the thugs. Well, long story short, they left. I kept eating my sandwich. I said, Lord, how do you let an evil guy do all this? He's going to have a Fuzzy Bunny church down there by my church. And I said, what are we going to do about this? 1 week later, there was an accident on I-95, and he was killed. And when they got in the trunk of his car, it was loaded with drugs and stuff. Of course, they arrested a bunch of them. So God took care of the Fuzzy Bunnies. Sometimes you wait.
So he actually left because that woman said.
Yeah, he left the business. And when he left, I was paying my bill, and she had come back, to the cash register. And you could see she was just like this. She said, that's one of the most evil men that's ever walked the earth. She said, my sister is hooked on drugs. She's in prostitution. And she said, the family's trying to get her out of it. And said, he is the one who led her into it. And I said, wow, what a story. So a 501c3 gives you tax credits under the laws, and you can start a church, and you have to meet certain criteria, and that's what he was in the process of doing. Declare it a church, so when you come in,
So when we change the name of this church, that name's out.
Well, looking around, I don't see any Fuzzy Bunnies in here. I think we would scare people off. We'd have to make sure they were on dope when they come in here. So here, drink. We get a free drink when you come in and free dope. Yeah. In 40, y'all, and I don't know where it's a benefit or not, but I got all these stories inside of me, and things that I say trigger them. And when I was teaching my classes in college, I told some of these stories. They said, man, you've had a life. I said, tell me about it. And I said, you ain't even scratching the surface. I said, the people that God's put me in touch with. But long story short, I wished I could. I don't like to write. And someone said, well, get a ghostwriter. I said, well, I'm afraid of ghosts. So I don't want to. I don't believe in ghosts. Well, I keep saying I'm going to get something to dictate into that puts your words out there, but they're not perfect. One of my youth pastor I had years ago, he lives up in Aiken. He was in his office, and I heard him in there. And he was saying something over and over, and he was getting louder and louder. And I finally said, Chuck, they've been to church here. I said, what are you doing? He said, it's this stupid program that says you can talk into it, and look what it's putting on the screen when I talk. And it was some cuss words and a few other things. And he said, I thought I'd get this for us in the church. He said, I don't think I need to do that. I said, no, It's what comes out of your mouth that defiles a man, Jesus said. So all that's inside of you, Chuck, and the machine can pick it up. But anyway, all right, let's be dismissed because I know the kids are finished. But we're going to have fun with this class if you keep coming. I promise you. It's not going to be a boring. And when we get to certain points like this, we'll finish this next week, sacred stuff. There's some cool stuff in here. And it's just going to help you appreciate that you're a Christian, like you said. You've been born over there, you'd be believing like they do. All of my doctors were Jews when I was in Charleston. And I told all of them that Jesus was a Jew, and he was the great physician. And I had one Islamic guy, and he did a good job. And the nurse at the desk, please witness to him. He won't listen to us. I said, well, let him get through operating on me, and I might talk to him. Do what? Yeah, it does. And I didn't like him, but anyway, he did a good job. Let's have prayer. Father, we thank you for this day. We thank you for minds that can perceive what's in our world. And then we thank you for your truth that, Lord, when we look at what's going around us and all the other religions, we come back safely like a ship into harbor out of the storms of life and know that we are anchored in your word and in your truth. We thank you for saving us by your grace. We thank you for the privilege to live in this country. Lord, it's scary to think what would happen to us if we'd been born in another part of the world. So thank you again and for loving us. Now, Father, help us as a church to have an awareness. There's people around us that need to hear about you, and help us to be led to them or them led to us so we can give them the good news. Be with us until we meet on Wednesday, for we ask it in Christ's name. Amen.